Good luck with the conference today. Turning Point USA. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, well, coming up, President Trump tweeting just moments ago and once again calling James Comey a slimeball. Ed Henry will weigh in and tell us about the growing rift between Comey and McCabe as well.
Plus, Heather Nauert, Reverend Franklin Graham, Joe Lieberman, Sarah Carter, and Steve Hilton. Wow, we've got a big 2 hours to go. You're going to want to stick with us. And showing a U.S. fast attack submarine launching missiles from the Mediterranean Sea, striking targets in Syria.
Our message was crystal clear. The United States is locked and loaded.
Some lawmakers accusing President Trump of failing to get congressional approval ahead of the attacks, as others claim he didn't need it.
I think defending people that we have in the region is probably enough of a reason under Article 2.
A damning new report by the DOJ Inspector General blasts Andrew McCabe for misleading investigators.
You have presidential political appointees calling the number 2 guy at the FBI, essentially saying give Hillary a pass. That's in the IG report. That's the real bombshell.
Ousted FBI Director James Comey gets ready to release a tell-all book.
And we're continuing to get more pieces. Some of them are raising a lot of eyebrows.
Because I was operating in a world where Hillary Clinton was going to beat Donald Trump.
This guy is the founder of the feast when it comes to political spin.
Welcome to Fox and Friends on this Sunday morning, and we begin with a Fox News alert as the world reacts to the U.S. and its allies for striking Syria. U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley is standing strong on that decision.
The United States is locked and loaded. When our president draws a red line, our president enforces the red line. We call on Russia to take a hard look at the company it keeps and live up to its responsibilities as a permanent member of the Council.
This as the United Nations turns down Russia's proposal to condemn the U.S. and allies for the airstrikes.
That's right, the missile launch targeting 3 chemical weapons sites in Syria, punishing the Assad regime for the chemical weapons attack on its own people. Here to react this morning, we're going to bring in Heather Nauert, Acting Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. Heather, good morning.
Good morning, Heather.
Thanks for being here. First of all, the latest message from the State Department on these strikes in Syria.
Well, Syria and Russia can become responsible members of society. Syria can first and foremost avoid further action on the part of the U.S. and its allies by declaring and getting rid of its stockpiles of chemical weapons. We have watched and seen for far too long as Bashar al-Assad has continued to use chemical weapons on his own people. 500,000 now have been killed since this war started.
Heather, the previous administration said 100% that they'd gotten rid of it, that the chemicals were out, that Russia had helped them do so.
Well,
did that
Russia
never happen, or did they lie
Russia
about
was
it?
supposed to help them do that. Russia and Syria, by the way, along with 192 other countries, are signatories to the Chemical Weapons Convention. That means that countries are not supposed to possess chemical weapons because obviously we can see the deadly results when those weapons are used against people. So Russia and Syria can stop using those. Russia can stop backing Bashar al-Assad. That needs to happen now in order to avoid further action, and they need to stop attacking their own people in Syria.
Heather, what is your take then on Russia's response? Clearly, the Syrian regime got the message loud and clear in the form of 105 missiles, but what is your take on whether the Russians are going to get in line now?
Well, Russia needs to do that. This administration has been holding Russia to account from day one. We have had many rounds of sanctions on Russia for its meddling in the U.S. elections, for what it's done in Ukraine and other countries around the world. Also, the United States has imposed sanctions upon Russian companies that have provided helicopters and other material to the Syrian regime. Without Russia's backing, Syria would not be able to kill its innocent civilians. Russia is responsible for this, and that's why we've tried all the diplomatic options. There are still more diplomatic options ahead of us that we can employ through Ambassador Haley at the United Nations, but also through the European Union and getting more allies on board with this. Our acting Secretary of State has spent a lot of time on the phone working with our allies and partners around the world, and they agree with us. Many other countries agree with us that this has to stop now.
Yeah, the president made that clear in his speech to the nation on Friday night, directly to Russia. This is a moment where you need to make that decision. As you know, the president likes communicating oftentimes through Twitter, as he has about what's going on in Syria. He tweeted earlier in the week and yesterday in response to the airstrikes. And part of the tweet that's been getting hammered by many in the media when he ended it saying, "Mission accomplished." Your reaction to all of that?
Yeah, look, saying that is an acknowledgement that the strikes worked. Not a single loss of American or allied life. Taking out 3 facilities that not only hosted but tested these chemical weapons, that in and of itself is a success. Bringing together our allies and then talking to many of our other counterparts around the world, including Turkey, China, and others, is an acknowledgement of the success right now of this. There could be more to come if Syria doesn't get in the line, if it doesn't stop killing its own people, and if it doesn't get rid of its chemical weapons.
Heather, you know, time and time again, we heard the administration yesterday say the policy is not regime change. They're not looking to topple Assad. At the same time, this morning, you're calling on the Russians to stop supporting Assad. What is then the policy in that region to bring this violence to an end that serves American interests, which is President ran on America first?
Certainly. And let's remember why the United States and its coalition partners, backed by 73 countries and entities, by the way, is in Syria. We are all together in Syria for the sole defeat of ISIS. But when you see a monster attacking his own people, it is incumbent upon the United States to act. So that is why we did this. Now, in terms of solving the entire problem in Syria, how do we do that? The United States and many other countries believe in the Geneva process. That means, and it's backed by a gentleman called Staffan de Mistura, and that means a political solution eventually for Syria. It's a long way off, but eventually we believe that Syria can rebuild itself and that the Syrian people have the right to decide who they want to lead their country. We're not calling for regime change. We believe that Syrians need to make that choice. Hard to imagine that Syrians would want to choose Bashar al-Assad, but that's the overall process, the Geneva process,
Well, Heather,
and that's something that we believe in.
It seems like the administration is all on the same page when it comes to the mission and the airstrikes in Syria, but you listen to members of Congress, and they seem to be all over the map. I want to just give you a couple examples. This is Chuck Schumer, who says appropriate, but be careful. Lindsey Graham says, I fear this strike will be seen as a weak military response. Justin Amash says unconstitutional, illegal, and reckless. And finally, Representative Thomas Massie from Kentucky says, I haven't read France's or Britain's Constitution, but I've read ours, and nowhere in it is it presidential authority to strike Syria. So your response just to the mixed reactions.
A few words about that. Article 2 of the Constitution. The president has the ability, the authority, and the right to defend American interests. And that's exactly what we were doing. And we were backed by our allies as well. I mean, that has been clear all along.
Heather, the message that was sent was that President Trump is not going to tolerate bullies. And we have seen that under the Obama administration's failure to bring Syria under wraps, it has emboldened North Korea, China, others. What is the message, and how does this impact players like North Korea?
Well, I think this is a great example of the world acting together to say, you know what, there's this thing called the Chemical Weapons Convention, and with 192 signatories, countries better start complying with that. That is something that's become very clear to countries around the world. We saw how North Korea used chemical weapons to kill Kim Jong-un's half-brother not that long ago. The United States found them in defiance of that, North Korea, that is. And so I think you see the world coming together on that. And of course, not long ago, we saw that Russia had used chemical weapons on our ally, on the British, through poisoning of the gentleman and his daughter. So this is something that's really come to the forefront again. And we hope that other countries are watching. We think they're watching.
I mean, Heather, you think about your job every single day and the challenges that we face internationally, whether it is North Korea, whether it is trying to denuclearize Iran, whether it is trying to find a solution in Syria. In the work you do every day, what is the number one issue you think that keeps the administration up at night? What scares them the most?
I think you see these rogue actors continuing to create destabilization throughout the world. And some of the chief parties among them include Russia, also Iran. We haven't talked about Iran yet today. You see Iran's backing of Hezbollah and other fighter groups in Syria causing further problems for the Syrian people. You see Iran involved every single day in Yemen, Yemen, where people are suffering there, women and children, so badly. And it's an issue that we don't talk about enough in the world community. It's something that the United States has sent a lot of humanitarian aid to the people of Yemen as a result. So we see Iran as a destabilizing factor, and that's one of the things that this administration has chosen to do. Other administrations failed to do this in the past. Look at Iran through the totality of its bad actions around the world, and we see that clear every single day in Syria, what they are doing and the misery they're causing.
And potentially a change in our policy toward the Iran and the Iranian deal with another deadline coming up. It'll be very interesting to see what is your message, Heather, this morning to supporters of the president who say we elected him for his America First foreign policy that would mean less involvement in the Middle East, yet they see these strikes and entanglement. How do you balance that?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. But look, this is America first, keeping America safe. But America is not safe when there's destabilization across the world. So when you see someone like Bashar al-Assad acting, there are things that we have to do about this as the United States of America. Not only is this the morally right thing, and not only does the United States and her allies have a responsibility to lead, that's what America does best. But this ultimately keeps America safe as well.
Heather, what does it say, by the way, you keep mentioning our allies. Well, this was Prime Minister Theresa May's first such action. She did it without the approval of Parliament. Emmanuel Macron standing with Trump. What does that say? What is the message there?
You know, it's funny because some people around the world say that the United States has lost its allies, that the United States is not taking a leadership position. This shows the exact opposite of that. We can have disagreements with our closest allies, the UK and France, about other matters, but when it comes down to it, we all stand together. You saw that in our actions in the United Kingdom. You saw that when the United States kicked out 60 spies from Russia here in the United States. Abby, your dad knows that far too well, and the sacrifices that our people have made at our embassy and posts in Russia as well. The United States stands behind our allies, and that is something that's very clear.
All right, a lot on your plate, Heather. It was great having you on this morning.
Thank you, Heather.
And great to see you.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the Sunday. All right, the president asking the nation to join him in prayer after taking decisive action in Syria. Reverend Franklin Graham says the president understands the power of prayer. He joins us just ahead.
And the DOJ Inspector General report revealing explosive details on how Andy McCabe lied to investigators. But does it also show a growing dispute between the former FBI deputy director and his former boss, James Comey? Ed Henry here to weigh in. He's been everywhere.
I think he picked out his own picture.
And his own song. Welcome back. Well, a new tweet from the president just moments ago saying this. Unbelievably, James Comey states that polls where crooked Hillary was leading were a factor in the handling, stupidly, of the Clinton email probe. In other words, he was making decisions based on the fact that he thought she was going to win and he wanted a job. Slimeball exclamation point.
Well, the big question in Comey's badly reviewed book aren't answered, like how come he gave up classified information? Jail. Why did he lie to Congress? Jail. Why did the DNC refuse to give server to the FBI? Why didn't they take it? Why the phony memos, McCabe's $700,000 and more?
Here to react, Fox News' chief national correspondent, Ed Henry. Hey, Ed, good morning.
Good morning, guys.
Ed, you are no slime ball in our eyes.
Yeah, you know, I wanted to be there in New York, but I'm so tired of all the winning over Pete.
Of course.
I needed a weekend off.
You needed to relax. Relax those muscles, Ed.
Yeah, thank you.
So what do you make, Ed? He's going after Comey hard this morning.
Yeah, remember when I was on the couch with the three of you on Easter Sunday, and I predicted you from sources inside the government, they were telling me that James Comey's book tour was going to be interrupted by something very important. Inspector General reports by Michael Horowitz at the Justice Department. We saw round one with the report about Andrew McCabe. We could talk about that in a minute. But here's the point. There are more reports coming from Michael Horowitz, one in particular that looks at James Comey, FBI officials, what was happening with the Clinton email investigation. And so my point is, he's going to be out there kicking things off officially tonight, James Comey, with his version of events. But there are a lot of people, not just the president, going after James Comey, challenging him on the facts. And remember, he's under oath before Chuck Grassley and other members of Congress and the Senate in recent months over the last year or so, saying things like, I had nothing to do with leaks. He said that under oath, when even Andrew McCabe, his former number two, is saying that's not really true.
Ed, we're also talking about faith in institutions. And what does it say about the FBI that its director was baking in an assumed political outcome and making decisions at some level, consciously or subconsciously, as a result of that assumed outcome?
It's completely unbelievable and shows why what the president has been doing is attacking the leadership of the FBI, not the men and women who are on the front lines fighting terrorism, fighting crime. They shouldn't have people at the top who are lying and are making decisions based on politics. Here's another thing. James Comey admits in the book that he didn't tell the president that the dossier, the anti-Trump dossier, was paid for by the DNC and the Clinton campaign.
Ed,
why did he omit that fact? It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Ed, let me just clue our viewers in. As you well know, it's often in the footnotes in these reports where we learn the real truth. And actually, we'll just put up on the screen a quick quote from the footnote wherein we see McCabe and Comey at odds over who's lying about what. It says, in a letter submitted by McCabe's counsel after reviewing a draft of this report, McCabe argues that the OIG should credit Mr. McCabe's account over Director Comey's and complains that the report paints Director Comey as a white knight carefully guarding FBI information.
What's interesting is that what Andrew McCabe, the former number 2, in his defense, he's saying, I'm sick and tired, basically, of the idea that James Comey is this quote-unquote white knight, couched and cast in the mainstream media as this perfect individual when Andrew McCabe was on the inside and seems to know better. How is it that Andrew McCabe, James Comey's number 2, and then Lanny Davis on the left and David Bossie on the right are all coming together on the idea that they don't think James Comey's portrayal in the media is true and they don't think he's been truthful? How is it that from left to right, people in his own office, the number 2 at the FBI, all challenging him on the facts? That's pretty remarkable.
I don't think I've seen anyone so loved and so hated by both sides of the aisle. It is fascinating. So President Trump up tweeting this morning, and his next one is directed at Loretta Lynch. And remember that tarmac meeting, as we often talk about, between Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch. He writes, Comey throws AG Lynch under the bus. Why can't we all find out what happened on the tarmac in the back of the plane with Wild Bill and Lynch? Was she promised a Supreme Court seat or AG in order to lay off Hillary? No golf and grandkids talk. Give us all a break. And we don't have all the information yet coming out of that IG report. But some people suspect some bad stuff might come out about Attorney General. Actually, James Comey alluded to that in the book.
Yeah, and we need to know what happened on the tarmac. We still don't know. But here's another key point. Loretta Lynch, in advance of this book, came out, did an interview with NBC News this week. What did she say? Among other things, she challenged James Comey in telling the truth and said that when he claimed, I had to go out there and claim that Loretta Lynch called it a matter, not an investigation, she says he never complained about that privately, contrary to what he said, that he never made that an issue. So why is it that all these people on the Democratic side are saying he doesn't tell the truth?
It's always difficult when you find courage after the fact, and that might be part of it.
Still a lot more to come. Ed, good to see you this morning.
All right, good to see you guys.
Keep winning, all right?
All right, I'll keep winning.
Come on, you want me to keep winning?
I'm always on your team, Pete.
Once in a while. What does she really believe? I don't know. All right, still ahead, former President Obama drawing a red line in 2012 when it came to Syrian chemical weapons. But it's President Trump who's taking decisive action. Former Senator Joe Lieberman here to respond.
And we are back with a Fox News alert. The president and the rest of the world continuing to respond to the U.S.-led airstrikes in Syria.
President Trump just tweeting seconds ago, the Syrian raid was so perfectly carried out with such precision that the only way the fake news media could demean was by my use of the term mission accomplished. I knew they would seize on this, but felt it is such a great military term, it should be brought back. Use often.
Use often. Well, here to react, a sage himself, former Senator Joe Lieberman from the great state of Connecticut, former presidential candidate as well, and chairman of United Against Nuclear Iran. Mr. Senator, thanks for being here.
Good morning, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you.
A lot of news this morning, so it's great to have you on the couch to get your perspective.
You have been focused on American intervention and interest in that region for a long time. What do you make of the president's approach in Syria?
Well, first, I'm appreciative that he responded, because part of why we're in the trouble we're in Syria now is that President Obama drew a red line on chemical weapons. Assad crossed the red line, and then nothing happened. And that was an invitation to keep it going more. So let's say first, thank you, President Trump. You responded. You did it with the English and the French, and it was twice as powerful as last year's. No. And in that sense, and I'm not going to quibble about mission accomplished. I think it was pretty clear that the president meant the mission that he gave as commander-in-chief, our troops, in this case, was accomplished. Obviously, we didn't wipe out their chemical weapons. So this is, in a way, giving them a third chance to prove that they're not going to use them. And we have to be ready to go back in if they do. The one part of this that bothered me was a statement from the Defense Department at one point that these raids were carried out in a way that would not affect foreign militaries in Syria. And that means Iran and Russia. Well, in my opinion, we complete the mission. In other words, we get their chemical weapons facilities, and if it hits some Russians or Iranian troops, that's their fault, not ours, because they don't belong there.
Great point.
You hear from a lot of lawmakers in reaction to this, upset that the president didn't get congressional approval for these airstrikes. I'd love your take on that. Do you think the president should have asked Congress? I mean, you hear a lot of their responses. They're all over the map. I'm not sure that he would have even been able to get their approval at the end of the day. How did that all play out?
No, I mean, I've been through this. I was 24 years, had the privilege of being in the Senate. There was a lot of military action. Article 2 of the Constitution makes very clear that the president, as commander-in-chief, can act when he deems that our national interest is at stake. Can you imagine what would have happened if the president went to Congress? Congress would have to debate the resolution.
Didn't Obama do that? And he punted it to Congress?
Well, in a way, President Obama said that he was going to have to go to Congress, and then they kind of reached the conclusion before a debate really got going that Congress wouldn't be supportive. I thought that was a real failure of leadership. In my opinion, if President Obama had acted then and struck the Syrian chemical facilities, it would have succeeded. That mission would have been accomplished, and it would have been very popular, including with members of Congress. I mean, if you're president, you got to be a leader, and so you can't wait for a long congressional debate when somebody like Assad, supported by the Russians and the Iranians, has used chemical weapons, because it could have taken weeks, and then it would have been a very long...
Weeks is fast for Congress.
Weeks is fast for Congress.
There was broad support. There was broad support back during the Obama administration from Democrats and Republicans to enforce that red line. Let me ask you, though, Senator, one of the things that it appears the administration tried to do is to strike a balance between getting us entangled in another quagmire like the Bush years, for which you have a lot of experience back in those days when you were a senator and on the Foreign Relations Committee, and also sending the message that President Obama didn't, which is you got to stop this. And that message goes not just to Syria, it goes to Russia and Iran.
So this raises a larger series of questions, and they're not easy ones. I mean, the fact is that at the beginning of this, 7 years ago, 2011, the Syrian people rose up as part of the so-called Arab Spring. Unlike in Tunisia and in Egypt, where there was also Arab Spring uprising, where the military didn't turn their guns on the people. In Syria, Assad directed his military to start killing the Syrian people. That was before he used chemical weapons, and almost 500,000, probably more, have been killed. Millions of refugees, including a lot of those flowing into Europe over the years since then. So the question is, can we avoid trying to... And then Russia jumped in, saw an opportunity to get back in the Middle East because we were laying back. It was a terrible situation for us.
So how far does our engagement go?
Look, I think this should end with Assad out and Russia and Iran pushed back. President Trump has taken a real
strong... How do you get Assad out? Because then doesn't it become our responsibility? And we've already seen how that played out in Iraq.
Well, that's the tough challenge. We don't want to get involved in a ground war. We can use our air power more to totally obliterate Assad's Syrian air force. We've got to really talk strength to the Russians. The Iranians are impossible to talk to because they're our implacable enemy. And President Trump's taken a real strong leadership role against the Iranians. He's got a big decision coming up in May.
Is he going to scrap the Iran deal in that decision, do you believe?
Well, unless the Europeans, he's given them months now, change the agreement or agree to work with him, with the Iranians to change it. To me, that means two things. cutting out the sunset, which says after 10
Yes.
years, less than that, they can build nuclear weapons. The second is they've got to agree to let the international inspectors go into the Iranian military facilities, which if there's someplace they're cheating, and I worry they are, that's where it's going to be. I don't think the Iranians are going to do that. I hope the president will pull out of the agreement. It's a bad agreement. And we have to confront the rest of the world with a choice. Do you want to do business in the United States or you want to do business in Iran? That's an easy choice for the rest of the world. They want to be.
We'll see if that happens.
Senator, you have a book out with Liberty and Justice.
Right.
So make sure you buy that.
Basically, and briefly, this is very different. It's about the importance of law in a society, and I base it on the Bible.
That's good timing.
The trip from the children of Israel being liberated from freedom in Egypt, but it takes them to Mount Sinai to get the Ten Commandments, and it's a message to us: freedom's not enough. We need good laws to.
It's going to be a great read. Senator Joe Lieberman, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to have you on.
Have a great day.
All right, coming up, even Democrats not forward to Comey's media blitz. He's facing the fire from all sides, like from former Clinton counsel Lanny Davis. That's coming up.
Although we did not find clear evidence that Secretary Clinton or her colleagues intended to violate laws governing the handling of classified information, there is evidence that they were extremely careless in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information.
All right, you are head of the FBI, James Comey. That is a position that should be apolitical, but this is such an interesting person because he is so loved and so hated by both sides of the political aisle. You just look at the show we've had this morning. We've had Republicans, we've had Democrats, all giving their reaction to the book that's coming out and the interview that will air tonight on ABC. One of those, former special counsel to former President Bill Clinton, Lanny
one of Clinton's
Davis.
old lawyers, yeah.
We asked him because he called for James Comey to be fired under the Obama years, and he had some very strong words when we spoke to him earlier on the show about James Comey. Here's how that went.
Only a narcissist who thinks he's above everybody and he gets to decide what to do. It's disgusting that we have an FBI director who puts himself above the law, above the Attorney General and the President. He gets to decide what's best for the country, that he didn't want Hillary Clinton to be elected without writing a speculative letter that 6 days later turned out to be about nothing. What he was really doing was protecting his political rear end with the Republicans because he thought that Hillary Clinton was going to get elected.
What our viewers may remember is back during the Clinton years in the 90s, Lanny Davis was one of the most fervent supporters of the administration and a lawyer at the very center of the special counsel. And now he is saying, and by the way, I don't know how many times he called James Comey a narcissist, but he's really speaking out and obviously making the point that not once, but on two separate occasions in a press conference and in the letter revealing the Clinton investigation that Comey violated due process. Really, it's not just weighing in on an opinion to get yourself on TV. This was a strong position by Lanny Davis.
And the president is commenting on all of this as well this morning with a new tweet. He said, "I never asked Comey for personal loyalty. I hardly even knew this guy. Just another of his many lies. His, quote, memos are self-serving and fake." So a lot of people feeling like, well, you wrote memos about when you met with President Trump, no memos when you met with President Obama. You assumed Hillary Clinton was going to win. Even if he felt like he was doing things right, clearly felt above the law and his finger on the scale.
Well, so those memos that you are referring to, members of the GOP and lawmakers are asking for the release of those memos of what he wrote down after his private meetings with the president. It's interesting reading that tweet from President Trump of how few times they actually spent together in private and how much was written about in the book, even personally about the president, against the president, about his appearance, about things that he said to him. It also reminds you there's no such thing as a private conversation anymore.
And a quick note about those memos. A quick note about those memos. The FBI is only allowed a few Republicans to see them. They can't get a copy of it, and they can't even take notes when they're showed the memos. The president is really striking a tone that we should see, in the name of transparency, those memos to put them out.
Yep, I think
more to come.
A gigantic counterpunch in the form of tweets this morning against James Comey and his offensive. Listen, the so-called mainstream media is going to go to wall to wall on this.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I do want to bring you some other headlines we are following this morning. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise is reportedly backing nominating Kevin McCarthy for Speaker of the House. The representative's office telling Politico Scalise is focused on keeping the conservative agenda moving forward. This as retiring House Speaker Paul Ryan announcing his endorsement for McCarthy in a Meet the Press interview airing later this morning.
I fully anticipate handing the gavel over to the next Speaker of the House after this term, and I think Kevin's the right guy to step up.
Paul Ryan announced last week that he will retire as Speaker when his term ends in January. Well, magazine editors appear to be turning a blind eye to First Lady Melania Trump. Actor James Woods getting a lot of attention after tweeting this quote: "If the Trumps were Democrats, Melania would be on every cover of every chic women's magazine in the world every month."
Truth.
Well, so far, Melania has only graced Vanity Fair Mexico back in February 2017. That's it. Well, during Barack Obama's presidency, Michelle appeared on at least 30 U.S. magazine covers during that time. Well, the left finding it hard to believe that Chick-fil-A, a company that prides itself in its Christian values, is popular in the Big Apple. Dan Piepenbring, a writer for The New Yorker, now facing criticism for writing this article titled "Chick-fil-A's Creepy Infiltration of New York City." In it, he bashes the chain's, quote, "pervasive Christian traditionalism." People on Twitter clearly unhappy about that. Brian writing this: "When did being Christian become bad?" And Michael writing, "Is this a joke? What is creepy, the waffle fries or the spicy chicken?" A lot of opinions about Chick-fil-A I find in this country.
Sometimes I just have to lean forward.
Can we just appreciate their good chicken?
Of course, the chicken nuggets,
Chick-fil-A?
the Chick-fil-A sauce is what is to be loved the most. I lick it out of the container.
I imagine.
It's so good. I'll tell you, those elites, like the guy at The New Yorker, they're running all the TV stations in this island as well. Just so you know, that's where.
And
you
I bet they eat a lot of Chick-fil-A.
Except from here. They probably do, hypocrites. Anyway, all right, the president asking the nation to join him in prayer after taking decisive action in Syria.
Tonight, I ask all Americans to say a prayer for our noble warriors and our allies as they carry out their missions.
Reverend Franklin Graham says the president understands the power of prayer. He joins us next.
Following the president's action to strike Syria in response to chemical weapons attack, President Trump asked the nation to join him in prayer. Listen.
Tonight, I ask all Americans to say a prayer for our noble warriors and our allies as they carry out their missions. We pray that God will bring comfort to those suffering in Syria. We pray that God will guide the whole region toward a future of dignity and of peace.
Well, the late Billy Graham spent decades praying with presidents, and his son Franklin continues to do that to this day. So what does he think about the president's call for prayer?
Reverend Franklin Graham is the president of Samaritan's Purse and the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, and he joins us now. Good morning, Reverend.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to be with you.
You too.
What do you make of the president's call asking for the nation to join him in prayer?
Well, I appreciate that we have a president that understands prayer and solicits prayer. Our country is in trouble. The world is in trouble. And the perplexity of the problems that the president faces every day at home and abroad is just incredible. And we should be praying for him. And he asked us to pray for our soldiers and for those that were in harm's way, the Syrian people, that there'd be resolution. But at the same time, we pray for the president. And the Bible tells us to pray for those that are in authority, not because that those that are in authority are perfect people. They're not. They're imperfect. And that's why God wants us to pray for the president, all those that are in leadership. And then the president in turn asked us to pray for our soldiers and those that were leading this charge and for the Syrian people. And I just appreciate that we have a man in office that understands the power of prayer and the need for prayer.
Well, and it goes so above politics. You think about prayer at a time when this country feels so divided on almost every single issue. Prayer is something that can bring all walks of life together, all political backgrounds, all religious beliefs, all together in one place.
No question. And God hears prayer. And if a person, a righteous person prays, the Bible says God hears that prayer. So it's important that we do pray. And whether you're a Democrat or Republican, The fact is, Donald Trump is the President of the United States. If he does well, makes good decisions, it benefits all of us as a nation, regardless of our political background. We need the president to succeed. At home, we need him to succeed abroad. It's not about winning or losing. It's about succeeding for all Americans. And so I pray for the president, and I'm proud that he's our president and that he solicits prayer, wants it, and understands it. It's refreshing to have someone like that in power.
Well, Reverend, your father has prayed with presidents. You have prayed with presidents. But I was struck when I watched the president give that speech. He didn't just mention prayer. He didn't just say, God bless America. It's almost like he led the nation in prayer for 30 seconds at the end. Is this the type of thing we've typically seen, or do you feel like his associations, the president's, with religious leaders has really emboldened him further to invoke the name of God in the cause of this country?
Well, you know, the president has not been ashamed of the name of Jesus Christ. He hasn't been ashamed of his faith, and that's refreshing. He doesn't mind pastors like myself mentioning the name of Jesus Christ. And President Trump, some people question his faith. I'm not going to question his faith. He says he's a Christian, so I have to believe him and trust him. But he is, I think, a man who does want God's help. And he wants God's help not only in the presidency, but as he deals with all the world problems and problems here at home, he wants God's help. And we need to get behind him and support that. I don't support every decision. I don't understand some of the things that he has done. But at the same time, he's still my president. And if he succeeds, then my wife and my children and my grandchildren, they're going to benefit from his success. So we all need to get behind that.
You know what? A message we don't hear often enough, Reverend Graham. Great to have you on this morning.
Thank
we
you,
all
Reverend.
needed to hear that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right. Well, if you read the headlines, you'd think that President Trump bombed defenseless Syrian civilians. So why are some barely mentioning what sparked the strikes to begin with? We are going to report. You can make that decision.
And is Joe Biden closer to a 2020 decision? He just revealed something moments ago. Don't move. We'll tell you.
Well, so-called mainstream media headlines taking on the president for his strikes against Syria with barely a mention of the regime's gruesome chemical attack on its own people.
Here to weigh in, staff writer for The Federalist, Bree Payton. Bree, good morning. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I think, it's very important right off the bat to recognize that the Syrian people are very afraid, and rightly so. I would be afraid if airstrikes fell in my town, even if they were taking out a chemical weapons facility. That's obviously a very scary and terrifying reality that they are now living through. And they have been living through 7 years of horrible, brutal civil war under a maniacal leader who has no qualms with using chemical weapons against his people repeatedly, even if it snuffs out the lives of children, which is what happened very recently. And so, I think in perspective, we have to remember what's going on here, that we are talking about chemical weapons. We are talking about very, very high stakes here. And you know what? It isn't just chemical weapons. If we zoom out, we can see that, until Friday, until President Trump started taking this stuff seriously, the only help that the Syrian people, had to look forward to was Russia potentially helping them. And we know how they feel about human rights violations. They don't care about them. They're notorious for doing this every single day. So, I think it's very important to zoom out and look at the fact that Russia has been trying to gain control of this region and say, this overall is not a good thing.
Bree, look at these headlines, that USA headline in particular, USA Today headline, Syrian Americans worry for families after Trump orders airstrikes. So Syrian American families, these families are already being targeted by the Bashar al-Assad regime, in addition to being targeted by ISIS. So wouldn't you welcome American action at some level to try to turn the temperature down or find some resolution in a civil war that sees no end in sight?
Right. Well, if I had family over in Syria, I would be terrified for them, not just because of the chemical weapons, precisely because of the airstrikes, because of the 7 years of horrifying war that they've been living under, and all of the other brutalities that you've mentioned, and the threats that they face from all of these other parties. Overall, it's a boiling pot over there. Of course, you're going to be worried about your family and their safety. And, I think it's perfectly reasonable to be worried about these airstrikes that are happening. And, it looks like the Assad regime is not going to change their tone or their course on this. So I think we can expect more airstrikes, as was promised to us by, Donald Trump, by the State Department, that if they followed through and did chemical weapons again, we would see more airstrikes. I think it's perfectly reasonable to be scared of everything that's going on in this situation. Overall, it's a really, really bad thing.
But Bree, do you see any hypocrisy in the fact that these headlines don't mention the fact that President Trump is taking this action after President Obama failed to enforce his red line?
Yeah, I think a lot of the media coverage has been really reductive and hyper-focused on, the most recent thing that's happening over there. This is the entire picture of what's going on. Like I said, I think we should absolutely zoom out. We absolutely should be talking about the use of chemical weapons that have been used against children. I mean, I remember last week when the media was completely outraged about that. And as you have pointed out, that has been put on the back burner to further the media's agenda. Yeah. But I think we should zoom out further and also say, look, Russia's been trying to take control of this region. It's perfectly reasonable for President Trump to say, no, we're not going to let the axis of evil take control of this region that's of strategic interest to the United States. And I mean, I don't mean to be reductive here, but really we are talking about good and evil. We're talking about the U.S., we're talking about England, we're talking about France. These are three countries who have historically saved the world from tyrants and oppression. And we're talking about Russia and we're talking about Iran. That's really what we're talking about here. Yeah. And it is frustrating to see the media focus on the most recent thing, focus on the most recent tweet, instead of having any sort of ability to have a perspective on what's really going on.
We've got to leave it right there. Of course, if you want to be worried about airstrikes, how about should be less worried about the laser-guided airstrikes than the barrel bombs dropped by the Assad regime. Bree Payton, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Bree.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, well, President Trump moments ago calling James Comey a slime ball again, saying he never asked for his loyalty. We'll talk about that at the top of the hour.
Plus, a damning new report by the DOJ Inspector General blasts Andrew McCabe for misleading investigators. Sarah Carter's been following it. She's got it coming up.